The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, from the moment you take your first breath, the world begins to shape you. Not necessarily with cruelty, not always with trauma, sometimes with love. But even love, when filtered through fear, can become a tool of control. And so as a child, you learn quickly who you need to be to stay safe, to be accepted, to be loved. You learn that there are parts of you that make others uncomfortable. Your anger, your curiosity, your wildness. And you learn that when you show those parts, there are consequences. Silence, rejection, disapproval, emotional withdrawal. You learn to adapt. You learn to suppress. You learn to please. And at first, it works. You become the good child, the helpful one, the obedient one. You receive praise, smiles, approval. And in that moment, you feel something that resembles love. But Jung warned us, this is not love of the self. This is the beginning of the persona, the mask. The persona is not evil. It is necessary in a chaotic world. It helps us survive. It allows us to belong. It gives us the structure we need to make sense of a society that is far more interested in order than in truth. But the danger is not in wearing the mask. It's in forgetting we're wearing it at all. You learn to show only the parts of yourself that win affection. You polish your image, round your edges, mute your voice. You make yourself small so that others can stay comfortable. You hide your light so no one feels blinded. And people like you for it. They admire you. They trust you. They even love you. But inside, something begins to ache. A subtle, haunting ache that whispers, they don't love me. They love the version of me I've manufactured for them. And the truth is, they do. They love your mask. They love your obedience. They love your predictability. They love that you never challenge them, that you never say no, that you never leave. You become dependable, but not free. You become adored, but not known, because the cost of your acceptance was yourself. Jung believed that the greatest burden we carry is the unlived life, and nowhere is that more obvious than the quiet agony of people-pleasing. It's a prison with invisible bars. Because how can you rebel against something that looks like kindness? How can you reject love when it's handed to you, even if it demands your silence in return? You tell yourself, it's not that bad. I'm lucky to be needed. At least I'm not alone. But over time, you realize you are alone because you've never shown anyone who you really are. And you're terrified that if you ever did, they'd walk away. So you keep playing the part. You say yes when everything in you screams no. You offer help when your body is crying for rest. You listen to others for hours while your soul begs to be heard. You smile even when your heart is breaking. And the most painful part, you've done it for so long that even you don't know who you are anymore. The lines are blurred. The performance has become the identity. And the mask has fused to your skin. Jung called this fragmentation of the self, a splitting of the psyche. The conscious part of you lives in the light, showing up as expected. But the unconscious part, it begins to swell in the shadows, filled with resentment, exhaustion, sadness, rage. This is your shadow, the parts of yourself you were taught to hide in order to be loved. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits. It watches. It grows. And eventually it erupts, maybe in the form of burnout, or a panic attack, or a sudden rage, or a deep depression you can't explain. You tell yourself you have no reason to feel this way. Your life looks fine. Your relationships seem stable. You're doing everything right. And yet, you feel empty. That emptiness isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's a signal, a message, a wake-up call. Your soul is starving, not for attention, not for success, not even for love. It's starving for truth. And the truth is, you've been living a life that's not yours. A life built on other people's expectations, other people's needs, other people's comfort. You've abandoned yourself for so long that you've forgotten what it means to feel alive. But deep within, something still flickers. A question begins to rise, soft at first, then louder still. What would happen if I stopped? What would happen if you stopped being the one everyone could count on, except yourself? What would happen if you stopped shrinking to make others feel tall? What would happen if you let go of the script and started writing your own? Carl Jung believed that freedom begins with confrontation, not with the world, but with the self. And the first thing you must confront is this. You've been playing a role that was never meant to define you. You are not just someone's child, partner, parent, friend, employee. You are a self, a soul, a universe of complexity, a force of light and shadow. And you were never meant to live a life of quiet submission. You were meant to awaken, and that awakening begins when you recognize the prison, when you touch the bars, when you hear your own voice whisper, "This is not who I am." That whisper, that terrifying, electrifying whisper, that is the beginning of liberation, because before you can choose yourself, you must first admit that you haven't. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. From the outside, everything seems fine. You're functioning, smiling. You get things done. You show up. People like you. You're dependable. But inside, something is off. You can't name it. You can't explain it. But it's there. Always there. A dull ache. A hum beneath the surface of your life. Like a song stuck in the back of your mind that no one else can hear. This is not chaos. It's not despair. It's a war. A silent war between who you are and who you've been forced to be. You wake up tired. Not just physically. Soul tired. You move through your day like a ghost in your own life. You laugh at jokes that don't land. You agree with opinions you don't share. You give pieces of yourself away. Not out of generosity, but out of habit. Out of fear that if you ever stopped, everything around you would collapse. You go to bed at night, hoping tomorrow will feel different. But it doesn't, because nothing outside you can change until something inside you breaks free. This is the war between your persona and yourself, between your mask and your soul. Jung warned that the longer this conflict remains unacknowledged, the more it seeps into your unconscious, poisoning your relationships, your decisions, your very sense of identity. You become a stranger to yourself. A perfectly curated shell that smiles on command, meets deadlines, and says the right thing at the right time. But at what cost? You start to notice symptoms. Not just psychological, but physical: headaches, insomnia, fatigue, a racing heart for no reason, a lump in your throat that never seems to go away. These aren't random. They're your body's way of saying something isn't right. And yet, the world tells you to push through, to keep going, to be strong, to stay positive. So you do, and that's the most dangerous part. You become so skilled at surviving, you forget what it feels like to live. Jung understood this better than anyone. He saw that the unconscious wasn't just a place for repressed memories or a childhood trauma. It was a living force, and when ignored, it would fight for expression. Not always gently, not always directly, but persistently, relentlessly. The unconscious doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear just because you pretend everything's okay. It waits. It speaks in dreams and symbols, in strange patterns you can't explain. It shows up in your relationships, in the partners you choose, the conflict you repeat, the emptiness you feel even in moments that should be full. You keep attracting the same kind of people, the same pain in different costumes. You keep saying, "Why does this always happen to me?" But it's not happening to you. It's happening through you. It's your unconscious, crying out to be seen. There's a reason you feel lost, even in familiar places. There's a reason you feel lonely, even surrounded by people. It's not because you're broken. It's because you're disconnected from your essence. You spent so long being who you thought you needed to be, that now you're haunted by the question, who am I really? And that question scares you, because you suspect that the answer might destroy the world you've carefully built, the life you've spent years constructing, the relationships you've poured yourself into. And you're right, it might. But Jung would remind you, it's better to destroy the lie than live inside it forever. You weren't born to play a part. You weren't born to walk in someone else's footsteps. You were born to embody your wholeness, even if that wholeness terrifies you. And here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is get angry, not destructive rage, but sacred anger, the kind that says, no more, no more betraying myself, no more swallowing my truth, no more pretending I'm fine when I'm not. This is not weakness. This is your soul waking up, but awakening is messy. It's not a sunrise. It's a wildfire. It burns illusions. It scorches the masks. And it forces you to see what you've been avoiding. You'll notice the cracks in your friendships, the falsehoods in your family, the hollowness of your career, and most painfully, you'll notice how often you've abandoned yourself just to keep others comfortable. This realization can break you. But Jung would say, let it break you, because what's being broken is not you, it's the lie, it's the mask, it's the prison. And beneath that rubble, something ancient and powerful stirs. Yourself, the part of you that never needed to be liked or validated or praised, the part that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. And that part is undefeated, unashamed, unafraid. It doesn't speak in apologies. It doesn't seek permission. It doesn't whisper. It roars. And when you finally allow it to speak, the war inside you begins to end. Not all at once, not in a day, but slowly, tenderly, consistently. You start saying no, not because you're rude, but because you're honest. You start resting, not because you're lazy, but because you're worthy. You start walking away, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. And each time you do, something inside you heals. The mask slips, the persona cracks, and the self steps forward. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, not polished, but whole. It's not a destination. It's a way of living, a life where you no longer live in fragments, a life where your outer world reflects your inner truth, a life where you don't have to hide anymore. And when that happens, you'll look back on this silent war, not with shame, but with gratitude, because it wasn't a breakdown. It was the beginning. Shame is a soul-eating emotion. Carl Jung, there's a kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't scream or break things or bleed. It lingers quietly in the spaces between conversations, in the silence after you say yes when you meant no, in the numbness that spreads when you smile, even though your heart is screaming. This pain is not caused by others. It's the pain of betraying yourself. And perhaps the most tragic thing is that you did it to survive, to belong, to be loved. You told yourself it was noble, necessary, that you were being kind, that being needed was enough. But deep down, your soul knows the truth. You've been giving pieces of yourself away, not as a gift, but as a bargain. You silence your voice in exchange for safety. You sacrifice your dreams in exchange for approval. You shrink in exchange for love that isn't even real. And at first, it seems to work. People like you. You avoid conflict. You feel useful, even important. But over time, something starts to shift. You begin to feel invisible in your own life. And then you start to notice something even more disturbing. The world doesn't see you because you've never shown it who you are. And this realization comes with grief. Because now you're trapped in a life that looks fine from the outside, maybe even admirable, but inside it's empty. Carl Jung understood this emptiness not as weakness, but as evidence of misalignment between your outer life and your inner self. The further you drift from your truth, the more fragmented you become. This fragmentation causes deep fatigue, not just physical, spiritual. You can rest for days and still feel tired. You can take vacations and still feel suffocated. Because the exhaustion isn't from doing too much. It's from constantly doing what isn't aligned with who you are. This is the cost of self-betrayal. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in small, forgettable moments. Tiny concessions you make daily. Laughing at jokes that offend you. Agreeing to tasks you hate. Staying silent when your heart is aching. Dimming your light so others don't feel uncomfortable. And the worst part? The world rewards you for it. You get promoted. You're called selfless. You're seen as reliable, agreeable, mature. But inside, you're disappearing. You look in the mirror and wonder, When did I become this version of myself? Who would I be if I didn't live for everyone else? And sometimes you catch a glimpse, a flash of the person you were meant to be, before shame pulls you back into submission. Because yes, there is shame. Shame for wanting more. Shame for saying no. Shame for speaking up. Shame for even considering that your life should belong to you. Where did that shame come from? From being told, explicitly or implicitly, that your value comes from what you do for others, that your needs are secondary, that your emotions are inconvenient, that your truth is too much. So you learn to apologize for your existence. You learn to apologize for taking up space. You learn to apologize for having boundaries. Jung believed that we inherit these messages not just from our parents, but from our culture, our religion, our collective unconscious. They become internalized as truths until you begin to mistake your programming for your personality. You think, this is just who I am. I'm just a giver. I don't need much. I just want others to be happy. But those aren't your beliefs. They're survival strategies. And the moment you begin to question them, you'll feel fear. Because the system you built, your relationships, your job, your routines, they all depend on you continuing to betray yourself. What happens if you stop being the fixer? What happens if you stop being available 24/7? What happens if you stop performing? You fear that everything will fall apart. And maybe it will. But what falls was never meant to stay. Because anything built on your self-abandonment is not love. It's dependence. It's illusion. It's a structure built on sand. And sometimes that structure has to collapse so you can finally build something real. Jung said, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. So, what are you doing? If every day you betray your needs, silence your truth, and play a role that drains you, you're not being noble. You're being consumed. And eventually your soul will rebel. Sometimes in the form of illness. Sometimes through addiction. Sometimes through inexplicable rage. Sometimes through total collapse. Because the self, the deep, eternal you, does not tolerate being silenced forever. It will fight for your return, even if that means destroying everything false in your life. This destruction isn't punishment. It's mercy. It's the soul's way of clearing the stage so that the real you can finally take the spotlight. But there's a price. When you stop betraying yourself, some people will feel betrayed because they were only ever connected to your performance, not your essence. And when the performance ends, so does the connection. That hurts, but it's not your fault. You are not responsible for other people's disappointment when you begin to honor your truth. You are only responsible for yourself, your integrity, your authenticity, your healing. Jung believed that wholeness is the true goal of life, not happiness, not even peace, but wholeness. And you cannot be whole if parts of you are exiled, if parts of you are silenced just to be loved, if your boundaries are constantly eroded to keep others comfortable. Choosing yourself is not abandonment of others. It's the end of abandoning you. So ask yourself, what is the real cost of continuing to betray yourself? What are you giving up in order to be liked? What is your soul losing every time you stay silent? And is the love you're receiving worth the parts of yourself you've had to bury to get it? Because if you have to hide who you are to be loved, that's not love. That's performance. And maybe it's time to stop performing. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung, there comes a moment, perhaps in the middle of the night, or during a conversation that leaves you feeling hollow, when you finally stop running. You stop just long enough to face a truth you've been avoiding your whole life. You don't know who you are anymore. Not really. You know your roles. You know what others expect. You know the shape of the mask you've worn for years. But underneath all of that, you're not sure what's left. You look in the mirror, not the physical one, but the inner one, and the reflection is blurry. You see fragments, echoes. You see the version of yourself that tried so hard to be liked, needed, accepted, but you don't see you. And that realization is terrifying, because now the question appears, bold and uncompromising. Who am I without the mask? Jung called this the confrontation with the self. It is a foundation of individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are. And it cannot begin until the mirror is clean. But here's the problem. Most people don't want a clean mirror. They want a comfortable reflection. They want the image they spent years crafting. They want the illusion, not the truth. Because truth is costly. The truth shows you the parts of yourself you've hidden. Not because they're evil, but because someone somewhere once told you they were too much. Too loud, too sensitive, too ambitious, too emotional, too complicated, too real. So you lock those parts away. You banish them to the unconscious. You built your life on only half of who you are. The parts that want approval. But the mirror doesn't lie. When you look deeply enough, you start to see everything. The parts you've disowned, the dreams you've buried, the needs you've silenced, the anger you've swallowed, the truth you've avoided. And it's overwhelming. At first, it feels like staring into madness, because what you see is not all light. It's also darkness, the parts of you that rage, that envy, that desire, that grieve. But Jung taught that wholeness requires integration, not perfection. The goal is not to erase the darkness. It's to understand it, honor it, and bring it into balance with the light. The shadow, he said, is 90% pure gold. Your shadow holds your power. It holds your authenticity. It holds the fire you need to reclaim your life. But it also holds your pain. And this is the paradox. You cannot become whole without first breaking apart. You must unlearn who you were taught to be. You must question the rules you inherited. You must dismantle the lies that kept you small. This is not an intellectual process. It is emotional, somatic, spiritual. It happens when you sit with your discomfort, when you feel the sadness you've been numbing for years, when you admit that you are not okay, when you say the terrifying words, "I don't want this life anymore." That sentence alone can shatter everything, because it reveals the truth. You've outgrown your own story. But growth doesn't come without grief. You will mourn the version of yourself that tried so hard. You will grieve the years you lost pretending to be someone else. You will ache for the innocence of not knowing better. You will cry, not because you're weak, but because your soul is finally being heard. This is the mirror of truth, and it is sacred, because only here, in the raw, unfiltered reflection of who you really are, can you begin to choose something new. You begin to ask deeper questions. What I believe, what I want, what does my soul need to breathe, to dance, to feel alive again? And the answers may surprise you. You may discover desires you thought you weren't allowed to have. You may feel anger toward people you thought you had to protect. You may realize that entire relationships were built on your silence. That's the risk of truth. It changes everything. But it also liberates everything. Because for the first time, you are no longer living a life that was handed to you. You are beginning to create a life that reflects your soul. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But you can only choose once you see clearly. The mirror becomes your gateway to clarity, to responsibility, to rebirth. But don't expect it to be easy. The people in your life may not like the new reflection. They got used to the old you, the agreeable one, the predictable one. They may resist the changes. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming selfish, difficult, different. But you are not becoming someone else. You are becoming yourself. And not everyone will celebrate that. But that's okay. Because the more you choose your truth, the more your reflection begins to align with your essence. The more you feel rooted, embodied, awake. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, feel differently. You no longer seek approval, because you approve of yourself. You no longer fear rejection, because you have accepted yourself. You no longer need to perform, because you are no longer ashamed of being real. And the mirror becomes a friend. Each morning, you see yourself more clearly. You don't flinch. You don't apologize. You meet your eyes and say, "Welcome back." This is not arrogance. It's alignment. This is not defiance. It's devotion to the self. And from this place, everything begins to shift. You start creating from truth, loving from wholeness, living from depth. The mirror no longer reflects the expectations of the world. It reflects the power of a soul that has remembered who it is. You don't need to explain it. You just need to honor it. Because the moment you stop avoiding the mirror is the moment you begin to live with your eyes open. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, there's something no one tells you about choosing yourself. The world doesn't always applaud. In fact, at first it may turn away. Because the moment you stop playing your old roles, the moment you stop living to please, to impress, to pacify, something radical happens. The world you once knew begins to unravel. Not because it's broken, but because it was never real. It was built on compromise, silence, and survival. And when you no longer feed it with your self-abandonment, it begins to fall apart. Friends you used to call family may suddenly grow distant. Partners may accuse you of changing. Colleagues may call you selfish, difficult, even ungrateful. But what they're really saying is, I no longer benefit from your self-betrayal. And that hurts deeply because these are people you loved, people you served, people you bent over backwards to please. But here's the harsh truth. Some of them were only ever connected to the version of you that didn't love yourself. They were attached to your mask, not your essence, to your obedience, not your truth, to your presence, not your wholeness. And when you choose yourself, that mask comes off. The performance ends. The illusion breaks. The energy dynamic shifts. And many relationships simply can't survive that shift. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're finally doing something right. This is the cost of truth. And also its greatest gift. Because as the old world fades, something new begins to emerge. You start creating relationships based on honesty, not convenience. You attract people who aren't afraid of your truth. People who don't want to control you, but walk beside you. People who see your boundaries not as rejection, but as clarity. People who don't just tolerate your authenticity. They rejoice in it. And perhaps most powerfully, you begin to attract yourself. You start coming home. Home to your emotions. Home to your voice. Home to the quiet knowing that you are enough. Without the performance, the proving, the perfection. This inner alignment changes everything. Your decisions start flowing from your values, not your fears. Your time becomes sacred. You start saying yes with intention and no without guilt. You become more present, more peaceful, more powerful. And yet, there's still grief. Because you'll remember the version of you who tried so hard. The version who said yes when they wanted to scream no. The version who smiled through heartbreak. Who made themselves small just to keep others comfortable. And you'll love them, not with judgment, but with compassion. Because they were doing the best they could. They were trying to survive in a world that punished authenticity. They weren't weak, they were just scared. And they kept you alive long enough for you to finally live. Jung spoke often of this duality, the paradox of life, that death and rebirth go hand in hand, that in order to become whole, something within us must first fall apart. And so is when you choose yourself. You lose people, you lose habits, you lose comfort, but you gain something far more valuable, integrity. And not just moral integrity, but spiritual integrity. You stop fragmenting. You stop lying. You stop outsourcing your power to others. You become one, and that oneness begins to radiate. People feel it. Some are drawn to it. Others are repelled. But you no longer care, because your life is no longer about being liked. It's about being real, and that realness begins to heal you in ways you didn't think were possible. Your nervous system starts to calm. You no longer live in fight or flight. You no longer anticipate rejection at every turn. You no longer feel like you're walking on emotional eggshells. You start to rest, not just physically, but spiritually. You feel safe in your own body, your own choices, your own company. And from that safety emerges creativity. Because the energy you once spent performing, you now use to create. You write. You speak, you build, you express, you love, you dream again, not because someone told you to, but because you want to, because you can, because you remember who you are. Even your relationship with time changes. You no longer rush. You no longer chase. You no longer confuse urgency with importance. You begin to move in rhythm with your own soul, not with the clock, not with the calendar, but with truth. And one day, you'll look around, maybe while drinking your morning coffee or sitting in silence at sunset, and you'll feel something you haven't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding conflict, the kind that comes from alignment, from being whole, from no longer abandoning yourself. That peace is sacred because you earned it, not by pleasing others, not by being perfect, but by being honest. Honest about who you are, honest about what you want, honest about what you can no longer tolerate. And that honesty will set you free. You'll still have moments of doubt. You'll still feel grief. You'll still have days when the old programming whispers, "Go back. It was easier there." But now you know the truth. It wasn't easier. It was just familiar. And familiarity isn't worth the price of your soul. The world after you choose yourself may be smaller, quieter, more selective, but it will be yours. It will be built from love, not fear, from truth, not performance, from intention, not obligation. And in that world, you don't just survive, you finally begin to live. You are not what has happened to you. You are what you choose to become. Carl Jung. So here we are, at the edge of a life you no longer want, and the threshold of a life you've never fully known. The moment of choosing yourself is not a lightning bolt. It is not a ceremony. There is no parade, no chorus of angels, no immediate transformation. What there is silence, a still, sacred pause in the noise of your life, a moment with the old version of you, the one who always said yes, who kept the peace at all costs, who traded truth for safety, exhales for the last time, and something ancient, something real, something you inhales for first. It starts so small. You speak your mind in a room where you used to stay silent. You rest when you would have pushed. You say no and don't explain why. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop shrinking. At first, it feels like rebellion, but soon it feels like coming home. This is not a single moment. It is a practice, a daily returning to yourself. 1,000 quiet choices to stand in your truth even when it shakes. A refusal to betray your soul just to belong. And with each act of courage, you remember, you are not here to please the world. You are here to embody yourself, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. Carl Jung taught that our lives are a journey toward individuation, not imitation, not conformity, but wholeness. And wholeness is not sanitized. It's not pretty. It's not polite. Wholeness includes your rage, your sadness, your wildness, your tenderness. Wholeness is when you stop amputating the parts of yourself that make others uncomfortable, and instead, you become all of you. It's not always easy. You will feel alone. You will be misunderstood. You will lose people who only knew how to love the version of you that didn't love yourself. But you will gain something no one can take: integrity, clarity, freedom, and peace. Not because the world around you is quiet, but because the war inside you has ended. You don't need to perform anymore. You don't need to explain anymore. You don't need to prove anymore. You just are, and that being, that raw, real, grounded presence begins to change everything. Your voice deepens. Your eyes soften. You start to move through life with a sense of rootedness that others can't name, but feel. You become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you've stopped trying to be anything else. You're not desperate to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself. That changes how you walk into a room, how you speak, how you listen, how you love, and slowly, the people and opportunities that match your truth begin to appear. Not because you manifested them, but because you finally made space for them. They couldn't find you before because you were hidden beneath layers of masks and fear and performance. But now you are visible, not perfect, not untouchable, but real. And in a world starving for authenticity, your realness is a revolution. So what now? Now, you keep going, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You keep choosing yourself in conversations, in relationships, in careers, in daily choices. You check in with yourself constantly. Am I abandoning myself in this moment? Am I betraying my truth to make others comfortable? Am I performing or being? And when the answer is uncomfortable, you don't shame yourself. You simply come back. You breathe. You realign. You return. Because choosing yourself is not a destination. It's a devotion, a lifelong commitment to the deepest parts of you, to the child who was never fully seen, to the teenager who began to disappear, to the adult who forgot how to say, I want, and most importantly, to the soul that never stopped whispering, I'm still here. Come back to me. You will fall. You will forget. You will doubt. But now you know the way back. Back to your voice. Back to your body. Back to your intuition. Back to your center. And in time, this practice becomes sacred. The most radical act of self-love. The most powerful act of healing. The most honest act of creation. Because when you choose yourself, you're not just choosing your own peace. You're creating a ripple effect. You're giving others permission to do the same, to drop the masks, to speak the truth, to live aligned. You're becoming a lighthouse in a world of lost ships, not by saving anyone, but by staying lit, by staying rooted, by staying true. And that is enough. So, if you're standing at the edge today, if you're feeling the call to come home to yourself, if you're afraid of what you might lose, just know this. You will lose things, but you will not lose yourself. And that is the only loss that's ever too high a price to pay. Carl Jung didn't promise us safety. He promised us depth, not comfort, but truth. And in that truth, you will find everything you've been looking for, not out there, in you. Subscribe to Carl Jung Depths for more journeys into the soul, psychology, shadow work, and the sacred path of becoming whole. Comment below, what's one small way you'll choose yourself today? Share this video with someone you love, someone who's ready to stop performing and start returning, because the most beautiful thing you'll ever become is yourself.